You can be wildly talented, deeply passionate, and still feel like a failure your whole life, and yet go on to change the world after you're gone. Imagine you're working a dull job at an insurance company, secretly writing stories on the side. You doubt yourself constantly. You think your writing is mechanical, boring, and no one cares. So you stop trying. That was Franz Kafka. Or picture being so broke that you eat mostly bread and skip meals just to keep painting. No one's buying your art. You're certain you'll never matter. But you paint anyway, because it's the only thing that makes you feel alive. That was Vincent van Gogh. These are real people who lived ordinary, often miserable lives. Kafka, Van Gogh, Emily Dickinson, Alfred Wegener. None of them knew they'd be remembered. During their lifetimes, they were ignored, ridiculed, or completely unknown. Each of them died, thinking they failed. But they didn't fail. The world just hadn't caught up yet. You might not be the best judge of your own work, and the world might not be either, at least not right away. These stories show how easy it is to misread what matters. Kafka thought his writing was worthless. Dickinson barely published anything. Wegener was mocked for his theory of continental drift, which now explains how the continents formed. They were all dismissed in their time, and yet their work shaped modern literature, poetry, art, and science. Just because something isn't recognized now doesn't mean it never will be. Your work could be important, even if no one sees it yet. The timing might just be wrong, or you might need someone else to find it later, like Kafka's friend or Van Gogh's sister-in-law. So many people never even start, or they stop too early. They assume they're not good enough, that it's too late, that nobody cares. But history says otherwise. The truth is, we don't really know what will last or resonate. We don't know what will matter. And that's why it's worth creating anyway. Keep writing, keep painting, keep building, exploring, and asking questions. Not because you're guaranteed to succeed, but because you don't know what your work might mean to someone someday, even if that someone isn't you. But what if the deeper meaning behind these stories isn't just about recognition after death? What if it's also about how wrong we often are when we evaluate our own potential? We tend to assume we see ourselves clearly. But self-assessment is often deeply flawed, especially when filtered through fatigue, rejection, or comparison. You might think your work is amateurish or irrelevant because it hasn't caught on, or because you're comparing it to polished success stories. Not remembering those stories are usually shown in highlight reels, not in drafts, failures, or years of obscurity. The truth is, you're probably not in the best position to judge what your work is worth. Neither are the people around you, at least not always. The world is unpredictable. What it ignores today, it may value tomorrow, and what you see as a small, flawed effort might one day be the exact thing someone else was waiting for. This isn't wishful thinking. It's how change usually happens. What seems obvious or important is often just what we've been told to value. Many things that are now considered great started off as strange, boring, or irrelevant. So if you feel like your work doesn't matter, consider that it might not be your work that's the problem. It might just be timing. Not everything needs to be great to be meaningful. The pursuit itself has value. Even if your work never finds an audience, creating it still changes you. It sharpens your thoughts, helps you make sense of the world, and lets you be in dialogue with something bigger than yourself. That's not nothing. That's not a waste. The people who preserved these artists' work, Kafka's friend, Van Gogh's sister-in-law, Dickinson's family, weren't famous themselves. They didn't create the art, but without them, we wouldn't have it. In a way, they're just as important. So maybe your role isn't just to create. Maybe it's also to support, to share, to help protect what matters, yours or someone else's. None of us know which things we make or love will last. But the only chance they have is if we care enough to try, and to keep trying, not because success is guaranteed, but because meaning often arrives in ways we never expect. There's also something else worth noticing. None of these people worked in ideal conditions. Kafka had a draining full-time job. Van Gogh was chronically broke. Dickinson lived in social isolation. Wegener faced constant professional ridicule. None of them had perfect routines, financial stability, or widespread encouragement. This matters because we often believe that we need everything to be just right before we start or continue our work. The right environment, the right audience, the right version of ourselves. But the truth is, the conditions are rarely right. Most progress happens in the margins, before or after work, in between responsibilities, in the middle of self-doubt. Waiting for the perfect moment to create is often a way of avoiding creation. The idea that we need to feel inspired or be good enough first stops more people than failure ever does. The lesson here isn't just perseverance. It's permission to begin anyway, wherever you are, however unfinished you feel. Most of the people who doubted these creators weren't cruel. They were just wrong. Their judgment was based on the norms of their time, their own blind spots, and their limited perspective. That means the criticism you hear, or even the silence, is not necessarily a verdict. It might just be a mismatch between what you're doing and what the world is ready for. And that mismatch is often temporary. Legacy isn't something you control. You can only control your effort. Whether or not your work is remembered or recognized isn't always up to you. But showing up and doing the work, that's the part that matters now. You don't need to believe you're brilliant. You don't need to know where it's all going. You just need to believe it's worth trying. Again and again. Especially when it feels like no one's watching. Because history shows that sometimes that's exactly when the most important work gets made. There's a quiet kind of courage in continuing, especially when nothing around you suggests you should. And that brings up another overlooked truth. Consistency can be more powerful than talent. We tend to glorify genius and sudden breakthroughs. But in most real-life stories, progress looks less like a lightning strike and more like a slow drip. Day after day, year after year, even when it feels like no one cares. Even when the work doesn't feel great. Even when you're not sure why you're still doing it. Kafka, Dickinson, Van Gogh, Wegener, none of them had an audience pushing them forward. What they had was a drive to keep going. That's what created the body of work that the world later discovered. And that's what's often missing when people give up too early. Not ability, just time. Creativity doesn't need permission. You don't need to be discovered to do the thing. You don't need to be published to be a writer. You don't need to sell paintings to be an artist. If you're doing the work, that's what makes you the thing you're trying to be. It's easy to get caught in the loop of waiting to be validated before you truly commit to your craft. But the people we remember didn't wait for someone else to label them. They just did the work, even when it was hard, lonely, or thankless. Your work might not change the whole world, but it could change someone's world. One person. That's not a cliché. It's the reality of how influence actually works. You don't need to be famous to matter. You just need to be sincere, persistent, and willing to make something real. If nothing else, your work can be proof to yourself that you tried, that you gave a piece of your limited time on Earth to something that mattered to you. And that, even without recognition, is its own kind of success. Success is rarely about brilliance alone. It's about persistence through uncertainty. Most of the people who made lasting contributions did so not because they were always confident, but because they kept going despite the lack of confidence. You don't have to feel ready to do something valuable. Readiness is mostly a feeling, not a requirement. Most progress, personal, creative, or professional, happens when people act before they feel fully prepared. Van Gogh didn't wait to master painting before starting. Dickinson didn't wait to be accepted before writing poems. They started where they were, with what they had. You can too. The work you do now can outlive you in ways you can't predict. It's easy to think of our efforts as isolated, but every act of creativity or curiosity becomes part of something bigger. You might write something that helps someone else think differently. You might build something that inspires a stranger. You might support someone who goes on to make something meaningful. That ripple effect is real, even if it's invisible to you. And even if your work never finds a wide audience, the simple act of doing it can bring meaning to your own life. It's a way of proving to yourself that you were here, that you saw something worth expressing, and you had the courage to express it. That's not small. In a world where it's easy to numb out or give in to distraction, showing up for your own ideas is rare and powerful. It's not about being remembered. It's about choosing to contribute to your own growth, to the people around you, and maybe to something bigger than you'll ever know. The question isn't, will this matter in the future? The question is, does this matter to me now? And am I willing to do it anyway? Because that's where it starts. And sometimes, that's where it stays. But either way, it's enough. It's okay if your work changes, if your focus shifts, if what once felt important no longer does. The path is rarely straight. Most people who make something meaningful don't follow a clean, consistent trajectory. They evolve. Kafka didn't start out writing the stories that would make him famous. Van Gogh didn't begin with his signature style. Even Dickinson's early poems looked very different from the ones that made her a literary icon. Their work shifted over time, because they allowed themselves to grow. Too often, people give up when their passion or direction changes. They think it means they were never serious. But in reality, Change can be a sign of progress. It means you're listening to yourself, adjusting based on experience, and moving towards something more aligned. That's not failure. That's refinement. Not every creative act has to be public. You can write things just for yourself, make music no one hears, explore an idea with no intention of releasing it. These moments still matter. They help you develop your voice, sharpen your thinking, and connect with yourself more honestly. Sharing can come later, or not at all. The work still counts. Not trying at all doesn't protect you from disappointment. It only guarantees a different kind of regret. The regret of never knowing what could have happened if you had followed through. The pain of wondering who you could have become. That kind of regret tends to last longer and cut deeper than the sting of failure. These stories remind us that most people are not as far off as they think. They're just one more attempt away, one more version away, one more year of effort away from a breakthrough, or from a quieter but still meaningful sense of fulfillment. You don't need certainty. You just need to stay in motion. Keep making. Keep refining. Keep exploring. Not because the world is watching, but because you are. Stop assuming that doing meaningful work means doing it full time. That belief holds people back more than they realize. The idea that you have to quit your job, go all in, or have unlimited free time to make something worthwhile is simply wrong. Kafka wrote during off hours from his insurance job. Dickinson stayed close to home her entire life. Van Gogh created hundreds of paintings while living in poverty, supported by his brother. They fit their work into the cracks of everyday life. You can too. You don't need perfect conditions to begin. You need small, consistent efforts. An hour a day, a notebook in your bag, a few minutes on the weekend, one paragraph, one sketch, one new idea at a time. This is how real work gets made. You don't have to love the process all the time. People often quit because they assume it's supposed to feel inspiring all the way through. But creativity is often frustrating, boring, and slow. That's normal. You're not broken. You're just doing the work. The trick isn't to wait for motivation. It's to build the habit. To show up even when you're not sure it's working. Especially then. Because here's the truth that rarely gets said. Most people who end up doing great work didn't feel like they were on the right path while they were doing it. They felt like they were stumbling, second-guessing, starting over. But they kept moving anyway. That's what made the difference. If you're working quietly, uncertainly, and imperfectly, you're not failing. You're doing what nearly all meaningful work requires. You're in the process. And no one, not even you, can yet say how far that might go. So what now? What should you do with all of this? You start small. You start now, and you keep going. Even when it's quiet. Even when you're unsure. Even when no one notices. Not because you're chasing greatness, but because this is how meaningful things begin. With effort, not guarantees. It's tempting to wait for permission, clarity, or certainty. But none of those are required to start. The only real requirement is willingness to try, to risk, to keep creating, even when the outcome is unknown. Your work doesn't need to be groundbreaking to be worth doing. It only needs to be honest. Most of what lasts isn't flashy. It's real. It reflects effort, thought, care. That's what resonates. Not perfection, but presence. When you create something, you're saying, I'm here. I noticed this. I felt this. That act, repeated over time, is how meaning gets built. Not just for others, but for you. And while you may never see the full effect of what you do, someone might, someday. Or maybe your work will simply be what helped you get through a hard time, understand something better, or feel more alive. That's reason enough. So don't wait for proof. Don't wait for the world to catch up. Keep writing the stories, painting the pictures, building the ideas, solving the problems. Quietly, persistently, honestly. Your job isn't to predict the outcome. Your job is to keep going,